state legislative briefing, and then...
Chair, I'm so sorry. We're not online yet. Hang on.
Oh, okay,
Sorry.
no problem.
Wait, what is this?
Our state legislative briefing, and then because the food is here early, we're going to take a break, get your dinner, come back, and eat it while we listen. Or we can do the closed session while we do dinner if we want, whichever. Well, let's figure it out when we get done with this. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yay, Kate Bradshaw, Angela Price.
It's great to be here. How much time would you like us to take?
30 minutes.
You want us to take 30 minutes? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's good to be with you, and I don't know that I can fully express the feeling of coming back home after the legislative session and being around all of our staff and the council and the mayor. it's something that all of my team has expressed, that there's just this feeling of walking back in the city county building after the legislative session that feels really welcoming and like we're back at home. So thank you for that. I also just want to extend my gratitude to all of you for your support, your expertise, your passion, and all the work that you did during those 45 days. I know it is a very challenging time, both from just the sheer volume of things coming at us, but then also as elected officials and having things that you really value in your role as a city council member being questioned by the state. And so I know it's emotionally challenging as well as is physically challenging. So thank you guys so much for your support. I also just want to talk a little bit about the tone of the session this year. And Kate Bradshaw, our head lobbyist, is here with me, and so feel free to add any color commentary as you do. The session had a much different tone this year than it has in years past, and Salt Lake City is the capital city, and so there's a lot of interest around what we're doing. Not only because we're the capital city, but we're doing really cool things here in the capital city. We're going to be hosting the Olympics. We have the potential for a Major League Baseball team coming to the Power District. We have the Utah Hockey Club and the Utah Jazz. And those are just the really big catalytic things that we're doing. There's so many other things that are happening in our city that are so exciting. And so there is a lot of interest in what's happening here. We have an international airport. We have unique water rights here within the city. And that often puts us in a different position than it puts us in than it puts other cities. And that can be really challenging for us as we have certain values here in Salt Lake, and our elected officials, both the council and the mayor, are elected on those values of our residents, and you want to represent the people who elected you. So we have always wanted to be a willing partner, and I can't underscore how many times I've heard both the city council, the mayor, our staff say we want a seat at the table and we want to be negotiating. We want to have strong partnerships with the state, and we continue to do that, and that is the story that's being told at the Capitol. Despite there being differences in values and how we get to from point A to point B, we continue to show up time and time again, and that has been demonstrated through the development of the public safety plan, through getting through 2 big deals last year, and implementing so many bills that come towards not just Salt Lake, but the cities in general. So I just want to kind of lay that out there and set the table with kind of the tone of the session. There were a lot of really hard bills for Salt Lake City this year, and I'm going to touch on some of those here in a minute. And I want to say that there were a lot of hard bills for us, and there were a lot of bills that started in a really bad place for us that we were able to make a lot better than they initially came out as. And then there were a lot of bills that just impacted cities in general that our team or our partners worked on. And so it's important for us, I think, to reflect on the progress that we make, although at times more incremental than we probably would like it to be. I want to thank our partners. I think this was my 7th session and my 5th with the city, and I cannot stress enough the value of our partners this year and how they stood in lockstep with us on very important issues. And so I just want to extend gratitude to the Utah League of Cities and Towns, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, the Salt Lake City Chamber, the various union organizations, the Utah Police Chiefs, Equality Utah, UDOT, UTA, the Salt Lake City Business Advisory Board, or BAB, and countless others that partnered with us throughout the legislative session. I'd also like to thank our lobby team led by Kate Bradshaw for their work during the legislative session. And then most importantly, I want to thank our city departments and our directors who not only are running departments, but they're also managing the incredible workload of the legislative session, and it is their technical expertise that helps us do the work that we do during those 45 days. Last night, or yesterday afternoon, you all received a legislative session synopsis, and so that is just a two-page snapshot of what happened during the legislative session and kind of some of those bigger bills and some statistics on the session that I'll go over here in a second with you. I also want to let you know that the Legislative Affairs Division will start working on kind of our master spreadsheet that we created last year that will go through all 345 bills that the city tracked and analyze them, assign them to departments, determine if there's penalties, and then identify what our next steps are. So we'll be working on that over the next few weeks, and we'll hopefully have that done mid-April. The departments have also all received a spreadsheet specific to their departments that outline all of the bills that they identified would impact their department during the legislative session. Some of those are still going through the process of awaiting governor's signature, but they at least have that working list. Those went to the departments and their respective attorneys. So departments can start working on implementation of bills from the session. Any questions on kind of where on the session or where our next steps are at? No? Okay. I'm going to go through a few statistics, and then if there are specific bills you guys want us to talk about, we're happy to do that, or else we have a prepared list as well. We had a record-setting 958 bills introduced this session. 582 bills passed, which was just a few shy of the record that was set last year. 378 bills passed in week 7, which is astounding. And we were up there until, 11:30-ish on Friday night when our last kind of big bill passed through the House. Salt Lake City tracked 345 bills and 523 subs. This is a 23% increase from last year. There were 32 high priority bills and 53 high priority substitutions. 28 bills passed that impacted the public safety plan, and there were 42 bills that were introduced that impacted the public safety plan. And I want to hover on this for a second and just explain what that means. We were tracking bills that, and I tried to be inclusive of everything that I saw coming through, but there may have been bills that were introduced that didn't specifically impact Salt Lake City, but would impact components of the goals identified in the public safety plan. So those got a special designation within Salesforce, which is the city's tracking system, so that we could say we had, 42 introduced bills that would impact components of the public safety plan. So this could have been a mental health bill, it could have been a Medicaid bill, it could have been a jail bill. So not necessarily things that were in the city's power to control, but things that would impact the public safety plan. And we're working with the mayor's office on updating the public-facing dashboard to identify what bills passed that addressed goals within the public safety plan. We had 2,608 department comments. So I would love to math that out. I probably should have, of how many staff hours that is, but it's a lot. And then I also just want to extend gratitude to our finance department. They also read every single introduced bill, as do I. And they identified 235 bills that have a fiscal impact, 126 of those impacting expenses, 83 impacting revenue, and 26 with both a revenue and an expense impact. So with that, I'll stop for a second and see if there are any questions on the session statistics.
Do we anticipate with the abolition of the UEOC that we'll see, is there any way to predict if we'll see the same number of bills? Do we think the number of bills is because so much time has been spent in the off season creating them, or do we think this is just the new normal for Utah on a growth trajectory?
Yeah, well, this year the UEOC, the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, restructured a bit, so they didn't have bills really going through that body like they have in previous years, and then the UEOC actually disbanded during this session. I do think, and I'd love Kate's thoughts on this as well, I do think that this is just a trend that we're seeing of this. If you look at the statistics, we're just sort of seeing a general uptick in bills each year. And so I don't anticipate that declining despite leadership and the governor expressing that they would like to see less bills.
In the time that I have been engaged up at the state capitol, which is a while now, 21 sessions, they seem to be training the incoming freshmen to understand the clock better. And part of that clock is when you can open up bill files for the next legislative session. This year, that window for the 2026 session opens on May 7th. And we are seeing more and more bills open, not just by the veterans, but by those earlier in their legislative careers on those opening days. Those that have bills that died on the clock, which are a significant number of bills just run out of time. And so those almost immediately get refiled on the 7th and come in as low-numbered bills. It used to be that you would never see, in the House, it was rare to see bills numbered in the 400 series, and in the Senate in the 300 series, and now you see high 400s, sometimes into the 5s, and the Senate is starting to nudge into the 400 series. And so I think it's just, it's become more known how important the clock is and how to, open things earlier. And so that just puts more things in the pipeline earlier to be introduced. You're not seeing necessarily any more become committee bill files than you used to see. That seems to be relatively stable. It's just that next wave of early introduced bills that I think everyone is learning this system.
There's, if you go to the legislature's website and on the top bar, there's something called a tab called Research and Legal. There's some really interesting data in there, and you can kind of see the trajectory over the past few sessions, and it's pretty fascinating to look at if you're interested in nerding out on those kinds of things. Chair, if it's okay, if there are specific bills you guys want us to address, we were going to talk about kind of the handful of high-level bills that impacted Salt Lake City, but if there are specific things you want us to speak to, we're happy to do that, or if you want us to proceed with our list, we're prepared for that as well.
I think just hit the big ones.
Hit the greatest hits? All right.
Greatest hits mixtape of 2025.
I feel like we need like a mixtape or something, the B side, the A and B side. The first bill that I'm going to discuss this evening is HB 465, Public Safety Amendments by Representative Snyder and Senator McKell. This bill started, this was kind of what we called the public safety bill. This was part of the response to the public safety plan and the letter that we received from the governor, speaker, and president in early December. And this bill started in a far worse place than it ended. And so we're really grateful to Representative Snyder for his work with the city from kind of where we had our initial discussions to where this bill landed. It's specific to Salt Lake City, as I stated. It started off that it would have impacted all cities of the first class that received Tier 1 funding, Tier 1 mitigation funding. So it would have impacted Salt Lake, Sandy, West Valley, and St. George. And what the bill does is it requires us to enter into an interagency agreement with the Department of Public Services, or DPS, to improve public safety within Salt Lake City. It outlines very specific terms for that agreement. They're pretty broad in nature, and they are things that we would have wanted in an agreement anyway, such as roles and responsibility for joint operations, data sharing parameters, accountability metrics. We have a requirement to present to the November Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Committee in partnership with DPS. So that will be our police department and the Department of Public Services presenting. It also allows for the state to exercise eminent domain on a city property that is in unincorporated Salt Lake County for the potential location of homeless service campus in the future. We are very grateful for the work that happened on this bill and where it landed from where it started. It initially had penalties associated with it. If the city didn't enter into an agreement by July 1st, we would lose our mitigation funding, which is about $3.1 million. And if we didn't enter into an agreement by October 1st, we would lose our B&C road funding. So we stood to lose, I think it was about $9 million potentially if we didn't enter into this agreement. And that would have impacted, again, all of those first-class cities. And then there was a secondary piece that allowed DPS to enter into any city within the state without having an agreement. And this was something that both the Utah League of Cities and Towns and the Utah Police Chiefs Association strongly opposed to. Sorry, I'm like cutting out weird. Do you want me to switch mics? See if this one is better. And again, that's where our partnerships with the league and others were really helpful in getting these changes made. And then a lot of credit, obviously, to the mayor for her work on this legislation as well. Any questions on HB 465? Okay. The next bill is SB 195, Transportation Amendments by Senator Harper and Representative Christopherson. This bill, again, started in a much worse place than where we landed. So, again, offering gratitude to Senator Harper and Representative Christopherson for their work with the city on this. This bill is also specific to Salt Lake City. It prohibited the city, where it initially started was a prohibition or a one-year moratorium on all projects that were defined as a highway reduction strategy. And so think of projects that are lane narrowing or lane reductions. And it didn't identify if those were permanent or temporary. So, for example, if a housing project is closing a lane of traffic to do work, that would have been included as well. And it would have impacted all city and state roads within Salt Lake City, and it was a citywide moratorium. So we were able to negotiate this bill to a much better place. Right now, how the bill reads, and it's still awaiting the governor's signature, is that any strategy that permanently decreases the number of vehicles that travel on an arterial or collector would be subject to these provisions. And so an arterial would be a road like 700 East or 900 East. This does not impact residential roads and neighborhoods, so I think that's an important piece. And as I said, it's applicable to all state and local roads and only permanent strategies. So if we are, doing a provision like 200 South where we narrow and provide bike lanes and a dedicated bus lane, that would be an example of a road that would be impacted. It identifies a study area, which is Foothill Drive to I-15 and 2100 South to 600 North. So it's not citywide anymore. And then how I like to explain it is there are several pathways for a project to move forward. The first is if a project was advertised by February 25th of this year, it is allowed to proceed and move forward. If a project receives state funding on or before July 1st of 2024, but has not been yet advertised, UDOT will do an expedited review on that. And then if a project doesn't meet those two exclusions that I just identified, a mobility plan needs to be developed by the city. That includes some additional outreach to the to business community and an analysis of impacts to state roads and other impacts to surrounding roads, and that goes to UDOT, and they have 60 days to review and either approve or deny that mobility plan. This provision for the mobility plan has an opportunity to sunset per the Transportation Interim Committee in 2027 interim. And then it also requires UDOT in partnership with the city do a mobility and environmental impact analysis on all projects that meet that definition of a highway reduction strategy from 2015 projecting forward to 2035. So we are, again, very grateful for the work of our transportation division on this project, on this bill. And I want to look at the exact title. I meant to put it in my notes. But our transportation division was awarded a project of the year for the 200 South project today by a group of really profound engineers here in the state. So kudos to the work that the Transportation Division is doing. We heard time and time again, I know you guys probably hear this as council members, that one of the #1 concerns of our residents is safety on our streets. And so we really fought for that at the Capitol and being able to maintain this very important municipal power that we have that's granted to us to be able to determine how our streets are designed and to ensure that we don't have fatalities here on our streets in Salt Lake City. Any questions or anything you want to add on that one, Kate?
I guess in case I don't get an opportunity if we run out of time, I do want the council to know how hard Angela and Dave Qualey, Michelle Hoon, Melanie Hall, all work. It's really inspiring to have this division. You know, it's really changed how we interact with the state capitol, and having these teams do these deep dives, it really streamlines then what I do in utilizing the lobby team more strategically. The lobby team is often not your subject matter experts. We're your process and relationship experts. And you can tell from the notes she's prepared and the way she understands each of these bills, just how much of a deep dive Angela and her team have done on each of these, along with the department heads on some of these big bills. So in case I didn't get to say that later, I'm saying it now.
Thanks, Kate. I appreciate that. HB 77 flag display amendments by Representative Lee and Senator McKay. This has been very heavily covered in the news over the past 2 weeks. This bill bans schools and political subdivisions, so Salt Lake City, from displaying certain flags. It has a very specific list of what flags you can display. And those include the U.S. flag, the city flag, the state flag, military flags, POW flags, Indian tribes, official college or university flags, and then Olympic and Paralympic flags. There were many iterations of this bill and subs and amendments on the floor. And so I know as I presented this during the session, we talked about, could you have a pride flag on your desk here, at City Hall, and that is not excluded. It's something that's visibly displayed outside. This bill has been pretty heavily covered from the, banning of flying pride flags at the city county building, and that is certainly really concerning to us. We also are really concerned about the kind of the overreach of free speech that this bill has on a city, and have a lot of concerns about how it's limiting a city's ability and elected officials' ability to represent your residents that you are elected to represent. And so there is if a political subdivision or school is found to be in violation, they report that to the state auditor. A process is being set up for that. A political subdivision or school will get 30-day notice that they are in violation and here, and then there's a $500 fine per day. Any questions on this one?
Yes, Councilmember Young.
So you've answered the first part of my question, which is what's the penalty and the process for that penalty. I think my second question is as we approach budget season, like how many of these penalties is reasonable related to reflecting inclusivity of our community and the citizenship in that space? And I understand, wanting to continue to try and build partnerships around this. But I also think to the concerns about overreach, sometimes the best way to demonstrate that overreach is to be an aggressor in terms of saying we're not going to listen to that. So.
Well, I will leave the budget question to the policymakers, including the mayor and the city council, on how you want to handle the budget. I do know that there's a lot of groups that are asking for a veto on this bill, and I think, as I alluded to, it's very much the displaying of flags that is of concern, but certainly the limitations on free speech are very concerning, and it's really unfortunate that Senator Pitcher's floor sub in the Senate didn't make it through.
Just in case you're wondering, the governor has until the 27th to sign, veto, or let something go into law without his signature. So he's still got a little bit of time in his window. There's definitely other communities, I think, that are considering and looking at it. I mean, there's the flags that have received a lot of attention, as this has been discussed in the media. There's also, I think, a lot of ways that impacts communities that haven't yet hit the media. Whether a main street is celebrating whatever the local identity of a community is, maybe it's Peach Days or something else that community celebrates, those aren't flags that are enumerated. So it hits at things like that. I happened to be visiting Park City over the weekend, and they have several very cute ski flags on their main street because it's the peak of ski season. Those are things that would be impacted. So I think there's probably still more to come, and the governor is being given lots of different examples of ways that communities are impacted.
Councilmember Lopez Chavez.
Thank you. My question is there any limitation addressed in that bill that would prevent a city or municipality from limiting other types of flags that were mentioned in the bill? For example, I believe Representative Lee mentioned that Nazi flags could be flown, for example. Could we, as a cohort, decide to pass something to prevent those type of isolated flags or hate symbols from being flown on government buildings in that capacity?
That would be a question for our attorney's office, but the way the bill is drafted, it's not the list of flags isn't a prohibition on the flags, it's what flags you can fly. So I think we'd be happy to look into that, and I'm looking at Mark, the city attorney, on that, but I don't know the legal parameters around that piece.
I'm just curious. I think it's interesting to think about if this, if the governor does sign the bill into law, what we could do to still continue to be a safe city, and perhaps considering what is hate speech or symbols that we don't want flown off of government buildings or assets that are owned could be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. I know we're at time. I could do unions and SEG really quick, or if you want to break for the closed session or dinner, whatever it is that you guys are doing, I'm happy to wrap.
I think we want to hear both of those really quick. So.
Okay, I'll be super quick. HB 267, Public Sector Labor Union Amendments by Representative Tusher and Senator Collmore. This bill was signed by the governor on Valentine's Day. It prohibits a public employer from collectively bargaining with a labor organization. It allows for existing collective bargaining agreements to exist until their expiration if they're in place by May 7th of this year. It prohibits the extension, renewal, and modification of any agreements after May 7th, and it does not allow the city to use public money or property to assist union activity, paid leave, or compensation for union activity. This bill was more targeted at UEA, but has a profound impact on Salt Lake City, as we're the only city in the state that does collective bargaining. Over 60% of our employees are union represented, and so we worked this bill really hard. We stood in solidarity with our unions, and obviously really disappointed that this passed and has been signed into law. I know the attorney's office is working on not just this, but we're working on a lot of bills and understanding the impacts and how we implement them and how we move forward. But I know the mayor and you as the council have expressed a strong opposition to this bill and solidarity with our employees. So I'm sure more will come over the coming months of how we implement that. And then the last one that I'll mention really quickly is SB 26, which was the Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone Amendments by Senator Harper and Representative Dunnigan. And this is an exciting bill because hopefully this is the final piece. I believe it is the final piece to keep the Utah Hockey Club and the Jazz downtown. And so huge kudos to the council and the mayor for your work on this bill. This creates a funding mechanism by which it creates a specific housing and convention center reinvestment tool that can be used, and a public infrastructure district tool that can be used very specific to the area around the Delta Center, Umoka, and Abravanel Hall. And it's to help fund and facilitate the redevelopment of those three spaces downtown, and then further the development of that convention center district.
I just wanted to share a really quick update on the PID timing for the council because it will be on your agenda. Notice was sent today to set a public hearing for April 1st. So at your April 1st meeting, you'll have a public hearing in order to create this public infrastructure district. So we're still working with SEG as to whether or not we need to have a special meeting on April 8th to adopt that public infrastructure district, or if the 15th is sufficient, but they're still working on that. So
And then
that's required by the legislation, by the way.
excuse me. The last piece I'll add is HB 360 Housing Attainability Amendments has a $10 million provision for legacy cities to do housing rehab. So we are very excited about that. Again, thank you so much for all your work, for your support. I can't tell you how many text messages I got from you, the porch presence I got during the session. It means more to me than I could ever express. So thank you guys so much for all that you do to support me and my team. And a huge thank you to Kate for her tireless work during the session and the many late night and early phone calls that she takes from me.
Yay. Yeah, so I think we're gonna do, thank you so much. I think we're gonna shift the agenda and do our dinner break now and talk about and have that closed session. And then we'll come back and do the rest of the agenda. So if we have a motion for closed session, I would love to hear it.
And the purpose would be to discuss labor negotiations and receive advice of counsel.
I move that we enter into closed session for the purpose of labor negotiations and advice of counsel.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Petro, a second from Councilmember Dugan. I'll go ahead and roll call. Councilmember Young,
Aye.
Petro,
Yes.
Mono,
Aye.
Louis,
Yes.
Lopez Chavez.
Aye.
Dugan,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. That's unanimous. Everyone grab something to eat. Meet back here. If you are not authorized to be in the briefing, if you'll just wait outside, and we'll open the doors again when that briefing's over. South. Come on down, Brian Fulmer and Cassie Younger and Nick Norris. Good to see you. And our Nick up on the diet. This is the first time for me. Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Nobody pay attention. And ignore that we're wearing the same thing. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so this is a proposal to amend the zoning map, as you mentioned, at 273 East, 800 South, from its current I or institutional zoning district to RMF 45, which is moderate to high-density multifamily residential. First Step House owns the property, and the stated objective is to construct a deeply affordable housing development on the property. The applicant is with us and would appreciate an opportunity to address the council, and I'll turn it over to Cassie.
Okay, thank you, everyone. As Brian mentioned, this is a zoning map amendment for the property at 273 East, 800 South. Next slide, please. Harold Woodruff, on behalf of the First Step House, has requested a rezone at the property at 273 East 800 South from I institutional to RMF 45 to build deeply affordable housing on the property, which is 30% of the area median income or below. Next slide. The proposed project has 4 stories with 34 one-bedroom units with supportive services on site, such as move-in orientation, case management, and referrals to off-site treatment facilities if needed, again, to those making 30% AMI or below. And it's also important to remember that this is a petition for a rezone, so the details of the project may change. Next slide. There's currently a former office building for the DAV, the Disabled American Veterans Association. Surrounding the property are some single-family homes and some multifamily homes across the street. Next slide. As you can see from the zoning map, the property is surrounded by a mix of moderate to high-density multifamily zoning, such as RMF 35, 45, RMF 30, and some residential business along 800 South with some SR3 mid-block. Next slide. The primary reason for this rezone is because of the uses involved in institutional versus RMF 45. Institutional is typically reserved for institutional uses like museums, hospitals, research facilities, etc., and doesn't allow multifamily as a permitted use. Whereas RMF 45 allows multifamily as well as a lot of other residential, like single-family attached and single-family detached as well. Next slide. Here's a table comparing the 2 zones and their development standards, which are overall pretty similar. The maximum height for the institutional zone is 35 feet up to 75 feet with design review and additional setbacks. The RMF 45 zone's maximum height is 45 feet. The setbacks, as you can see here, are pretty similar. Again, the primary reason for the rezone request is the multifamily permitted use. Next slide. There are some potential changes that the Planning Commission is considering to the RMF 45 zone, and this would be potentially combining the RMF 35 and 45 zones together. As the draft is currently drafted, the height would be based upon the building form, which was 45 feet for multifamily, so the same as the existing RMF 45 zone. But there would be an addition of design standards, tall buildings like building materials, ground floor transparency, etc. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on this on March 12th. The item was tabled, and they will continue the public hearing and make a recommendation at a later date. The applicant would be vested to whatever zone they submit, either a completed building permit or a planning process submittal, whether that's the RMF 45 as it is now or future changes to that zone. Next slide. We have received public input on this prior to the Planning Commission meeting. Some residents have been in support of the affordable housing and the First Step organization, but many have had concerns about safety, parking, proximity to the abutting single-family homes and the high concentration of affordable housing in the neighborhood. The Central City Community Executive Board also expressed these concerns, stating that Central City has taken on the burden of these affordable housing projects, which has created a less safe environment for the residents and the population.
Downward. Most importantly, be sure to make your intentions clear. Drivers, be respectful of other road users, including bicyclists. Remember, courtesy is contagious. Bicycles are considered a vehicle when on the road, so treat them as such. Utah law requires drivers to allow bicyclists a minimum of 3 feet when passing. Be cautious of other traffic when doing so. Be aware that bicyclists have a right to a lane and drivers must yield to them. When bicyclists and drivers work together to follow these tips, we can reach 0 fatalities on our roadways.
As one of 2 international peace gardens in the United States, Salt Lake City's International Peace Gardens are nestled just inside of Jordan Park on the west side. The idea for the gardens was conceived in 1939 by Mrs. Otto Wisely. Her goal was to give groups of foreign origin in Salt Lake City a spot to call their own for the state's coming centennial celebration in 1947. Though World War II delayed the project, it resumed again once the war had concluded. Each section of the park was dedicated to a different country. The first to be complete was dedicated to the United States. The second was the Japanese section of the garden. All in all, more than 25 nations are represented at the Peace Gardens today, spanning every corner of the globe from Asia, South and Central America and Africa, to Europe, Canada, and the Middle East and all points in between. Today, the International Peace Gardens stand as a symbol of the inviting spirit of Salt Lake City, a beautiful way to illustrate that all immigrants and refugees are welcome here, regardless of national origin. It's also a reminder that those who came to Salt Lake City would find a home here, and at the Peace Gardens, find a place that felt like home too.
As an ordained minister, it is my ministry to help people with their spiritual lives. I need to see signs of trouble, like meth use, signs like sudden mood swings, hyperactivity, and erratic sleep patterns. Things I should have picked up on in one of the most important people in my life, my own daughter. Fortunately, someone did.
To learn more, go to nmethnow.org or call 211.
If you store your guns properly, I'll feel safer when I'm playing outside.
Safer when walking home.
And I won't have to tell my kids, this isn't a drill.
Never let your gun get into the wrong hands. Always lock it up.
Captain, our sensors indicate a huge whirling belt of alien matter approaching the Enterprise at warp 6.
Red alert, repeat, red alert. Activate view screen, Mr. Sulu.
What you're looking at, Captain, is the Romvian pollution belt, formed hundreds of years ago.
Wasn't it before people became aware of pollution and began pointing it out?
Exactly. Once enough people started pointing out pollution, the pollution stopped.
Yes, Mr. Spock. People finally got the point.
In 1909, the Salt Lake Herald-Republican newspaper ran an unusual contest to bolster readership. They hired a young woman in disguise artist named Dolly Dimples and offered a reward for her capture within a 2-week span. If you had the current day's paper when you spotted her and spoke a code phrase, you'd get $50. If you happened to have your receipt for a subscription to the paper, that day's issue, and the catchphrase, you'd get $500. She would roam the city in disguises and then write about her exploits in the next day's paper. After 2 weeks in Salt Lake, the prize went unclaimed. The promotion went so well for the Herald-Republican that the Ogden Standard got in on it too. But that's where things went awry for Dolly Dimples and her managers. After a woman won the prize in Ogden, Dimples and her managers moved on to Los Angeles, but they were greeted by police who arrested them on felony charges. The winner of the Ogden Prize only did so because Dolly's handlers pointed her out for a cut of the winnings. The Republican Herald printed the story of the arrest and offered a new reward, this time for anyone with evidence that Dolly Dimples had run a crooked contest. The evidence never arrived, and an Ogden jury eventually declared Dolly Dimples and her cohorts not guilty in March of 1910.
The neighborhood surrounding. And it's extraordinarily effective at reducing future homelessness. The individuals who are living in our apartments, and this is the national data as well, and ours aligns with it. 95% of the folks who have moved into our permanent supportive housing settings are folks who moved in the original group back in 2020, and they're still there. So the proposed new building, as was already discussed, 34 one-bedroom units, 4-story with programmatic space on the ground floor, on-site property management and maintenance. We always partner with Housing Connect, who has an abundance of experience as they're formerly the Housing Authority of the Salt Lake County, an abundance of experience doing property management. Section 8 compliance, so Section 8 housing voucher, as well as low-income housing tax credit compliance. 24/7 on-site support staff with enhanced services for tenants. The target population for this project are single adults with a disability, mental illness, homelessness, or at risk for homelessness. I would encourage the council to drive by 439 South Denver Street, right down here, to get a sense for what the street presence would be like for this property. It will look very similar. It will feel very similar to that. Well, let me add a little bit of a caveat there, except that that's a 75-unit apartment building. This is only 34. It's only 34 one-bedroom units, but a similar population. Impact has been minimal since 2020. I've spoken with both Salt Lake City Fire and PD, and I asked them if they were concerned about the EMS callouts to our property there, and they said, no, actually, it's pretty minimal, and the ones that we do get called out for are they're appropriate. We want you to call us for those types of reasons.
Okay.
With that, I'll end my comments.
Thank you. Councilmember Young.
Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing this forward and finding solutions in a city that is expensive to be able to create these types of resources that are so desperately needed. I think one thing that I was hoping you'd address is the current waiting list that your organization has related to being able to help additional individuals who qualify for your services. Can you speak to that?
So current waiting list and who qualifies?
More so just like what's the need that we would be able to address here?
The population, the target population? Well, yeah. So Salt Lake County just did an estimate, and it was based on the numbers of individuals that they're interacting with. And they identified about 1,000 individuals who are in need of services. I personally think that number is a bit low because it only reflects those individuals who are engaged with the Salt Lake County Behavioral Health Services System. And there are others in the homeless services system that aren't touched by that system. So I don't know how high I should go with the number, but I think it's a low number.
Thank you. So I think we can agree that the need is there and that this would be a part of a greater solution. I think the other thing that I would just share for the good of anyone who's listening and or maybe some of those organizations that stated they had some concerns, I would just encourage them to come and do a tour because I think that having not just been on the outside of your building, but being on the inside of your building, understanding all of the structures that you put in place to be able to prioritize not just the safety of the community, but the safety of your residents as well, in terms of treating them with care and with dignity, and also the community norms that you establish in terms of holding those individuals to high expectations and making sure that that is an important part of, being able to create a safe living environment. I will say that having been there and having walked walked through the facilities. It is safer than most college dorms I have been in. And so I do think that I'm very appreciative of those structures. And I think that the more people that we can help in this way, especially our veterans, is something that we need to support as a city.
So much.
Councilmember Romano, and then Councilmember Leva Chavez, and then Dugan.
Yeah, I appreciate this application, and I really appreciate what First Step House is doing for our community in terms of serving those with the greatest need. It was interesting you said that the 2020, I want to clarify the statistic you gave us, the 2020 building that you finished, still 90% occupied by the original tenants. Is that, can you restate whatever? You said one of your buildings was like however many years ago and it's still occupied by the original tenants. Can you restate?
Can you restate that?
Restate that?
Oh, the building that we brought into service in 2020, the one you've been to.
Right.
The vast majority of individuals who are tenants today were original tenants.
Thank you.
I would say north of 85%.
Thank you. I think that's important because these are, I guess, for those people who might not be familiar with what First Step House does, these are the individuals that without services like this would be on the street. So that's people that for the last 5.5 years have been stably and permanently housed. So there's no question that we need more of this. I will just state that affordable housing in general is something that's really important to me, especially housing that serves the population with the greatest need. But even absent of that, and I'm very understanding of communities that feel like there's a lot of supportive services in their neighborhood. But even absent of that, I think this is a very reasonable place to do this size of a building, even if it was market rate. So I'm supportive of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I just want to reiterate for my colleagues some of the sentiment from the community council. They've gone and visited, and I believe they've taken the time to really understand First Step House. And to me, I want to aid them and defend them in proximity to how much saturation there is in deeply affordable housing. I want to remind each of us within the shared community of how many different types of affordable units there are in each district. District 1 has 2,435. District 2 has 1,244 units. District 3 has 480. District 4 has 2,163 units, and a majority of those being consolidated within this geographic proximity that we're talking about in Central City. District 5 has 1,214. District 6 has 0. District 7 has 241. So yes, according to the application, this qualifies for a rezone, but there's a greater conversation to be had as to how we're saturating permanent supportive housing and the social determinants of health for both clientele and neighbors in these neighborhoods in proximity to the HRC. There's obviously going to be a hospital that we approved on State Street and the proximity there as well. So I just want to find a balance, and I want to ask the applicant, knowing this, and I'm sure we'll take a straw poll, it sounds like we will today. I want to understand if you'd be willing and able to enter, not a deed restriction, a development agreement, excuse me, thank you. In terms of proximity to Topher Park security, there's a lot of different crimes happening in this geographic location. The structure across the street from where this parcel is located at is River Rock. They've had an insurmountable amount of crime, and thanks to security measures and the neighborhood coming together, that's decreased, but there's still significant crime and saturation. So I want to be able to provide my neighbors the ability to have a solution in place. I don't think there's concern about the unit size or the density. There's concern about the oversaturation and population in this neighborhood that is slowly displacing families. And we made a commitment, again, I've said this multiple times today throughout this meeting, that we've made this promise and commitment to infuse our Central City neighborhoods with more families. And so I don't disagree. There's people that are in high need and clientele that deserve these different types of behavioral services and permanent supportive housing. What I'd like to have a conversation about with my colleagues, though, is that we have other districts that do not have a single unit in their neighborhoods. And so I just think it's unfair for this neighborhood to have and share that responsibility when they feel overwhelmed without the proper public safety services or securities in place so that they can just enjoy pocket park. They don't even have access to a regional park or green space. But back to my original question, Sean, do you mind answering? Would you be able to enter a development agreement with us?
Is able to answer?
Mr. Chair.
I have some hearing loss. So, repeat.
Yeah, thank you, no problem. Would First Step House be interested in entering into a development agreement with Salt Lake City?
Mr. Chair, can you clarify what the development agreement would be asking?
Yes, it would be in terms of some of the security measures that were already in the transmittal. Police made the recommendation. So they recognize fencing, security measures, other types of public safety measures.
We would absolutely be willing to have conversation. Yes, we would. I would want to have conversation. I don't want to tie us to something that is unreasonable.
Sorry, Sean, do you want to say it in the mic for the record?
I'm absolutely willing to have conversation about develop some sort of a development agreement, for security. But what I would want to do is have conversation with you and our fellow neighbors about what we're already doing and what crime in the vicinity of our facilities looks like. I don't want to say there's no crime because that's not true. But it's usually us who are policing our neighborhood and moving people along to minimize that. There's actually a research article that talks about how because of the number of eyes on, particularly in urban neighborhoods, crime goes down in the vicinity of low-income housing tax credit projects. So my answer is yes, let's talk.
Could I just add to that a little bit? We're just one component of this project. There are people involved with tax credits, there's lenders, there's many other entities. I'm familiar with development agreements, and for the most part, they've been beneficial. But any agreements that relate to this property would have to also be approved by all of the partners that are involved.
Chair.
So it's just not Sean being able to say yes to everything.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I don't know if planning has an answer or if we could just give a note to ask the question.
Which? About
if
the
it's
development
legal
agreement?
to enter a development agreement or not.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, it is.
With the tax credits?
yeah, it's
It is legal.
legal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just what we want to put in there. So what I'm hearing, Councilman, is it okay, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
What I'm hearing, Councilman Lopez Chavez, is that the development agreement would be something like we would approve the rezone subject to fencing being installed that would meet some standard. But we need to be really specific about what we're asking
Correct,
in the development
yes.
agreement in order to even begin those conversations, but very, definitely to execute such an agreement. So in addition to fencing, I'm not opposed to that. It's just what are the things that can be in a development agreement? I think things that couldn't be are things like after it's developed, it must be operated in a certain way. And maybe it can, but my experience with development agreements is really like the development is going to be built in a certain way, not necessarily.
I just brought it up so it can be on the record as an option for the community members that are listening. There is not a great support in the central city, and that's a reality. We made a commitment when we installed the HRC. We made a commitment. There's VA housing right across Topher. There's River Rock. There's so many different types of permanent, deeply affordable or affordable housing in this geographic proximity. And so I want to give an alternative to my neighbors that don't feel supportive. And if this council votes for it, will feel like we shoved permanent supportive housing into a neighborhood that doesn't have the resources available to even support the housing that's there right now. So I just want to have that alternative available. It sounded like we're not certain if with the tax credits, I mean, I assume, yes, it's legal, but I want to understand and see if planning would be willing to help support that as well. Since it's going to the Planning Commission, it looks like for one more hearing,
So-
if I'm not mistaken.
I think it would be nice if you have specifics you want to put in that development agreement. You work with Nick to put those in writing, and then you can then the next time we meet, we can discuss those portions of the development agreement, and our planning and Sean can look at that development agreement and take it to the appropriate people there. That's part of it, because that's how that discussion works. So hey, I want to do this, and this, and that. Yeah, because yeah.
It looks like it's mainly the recommendations from the police department review. Right. So we have that list. So Sean, we can get that to you and talk with you guys about how we could implement those potentially.
Yeah, I'd like the neighbors included though, the Central City Community Council.
Okay.
I know that's not part of the process. I'm just saying they feel like they are left out right now.
Well, I think, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think you've done a great job articulating the concerns of the neighborhood. We just, in the work session, generally can't work out the terms of the agreement here now. So if you're asking for, if you want to make a straw poll that we ask staff to work with planning to put forth a development agreement that addresses the security concerns, then that's something that we could straw poll today. But like hammering out the terms of a specific contract is not something that we can do. Okay. Yeah, then that's fine. I think that would be totally in order. Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you. I appreciate Sean, and just kind of echo what Councilmember Young said. I mean, First Step Housing and the tours you've had me on at the First Step House is incredible. And every time I drive down 500 South, because I usually, a lot of times they come off of 400 South and they go down 500 East and go by First Step Housing. It's, it's clean. There's a few guys stand outside like anywhere else in any other neighborhood. It's an awesome place, and there's never any complaints here. So I really appreciate all the work you guys do on even letting guys have a leash to go find a place on their own, and then realizing that that person can't really actually be there, and you bring him back into your facility, and now he's happy, and he's been as productive as he can in the society, and he hasn't been a burden on anybody. He's been actually an asset to people. So I really appreciate your work there. On this, since this is a rezone from industrial to RMF 45, one of the questions and one of the ideas is that because it's going to go on RMF 45, if you were to have an issue and you sell the property, that property could be done something else, taken to any do whatever they want to as far as an RMF 45 zoning requires. But as far as a development agreement for your project, this goes back to the development of the housing would be for people 30% AMI or lower, as stated that you need for the Section 8, the disabled, that will pretty much, this is the end of the road. So if that would be part of the development agreement, we'll get that with you with this next iteration.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I clarify something?
Yes, go ahead.
Councilmember Lopez Chavez mentioned this going back to the Planning Commission. I think there was some confusion.
Yeah.
The RMF 3545 consolidation is going back to the Planning Commission. They tabled it at their previous meeting, but this rezone that we're talking about is not scheduled to go back to the Planning Commission. Okay. It will have a public hearing and then a council vote.
Okay. And just to be clear, Nick, I think this is a question for you. Hi. So when we do, or maybe it's an attorney question that I think you can answer it. So when we do development agreements, that's an agreement between the city and the owner of the property, right? Those are the two parties that typically.
Right. They're typically transferable to future owners as well.
Right. Okay. So, and then with this property, if it were to stay institutional, like, what do you think is the likelihood that some institutional entity is going to come and want this specific property, as opposed to me, just tell me if I'm wrong. To me, this property, whether it's First Step House or any other people who might come after them, are going to seek to rezone this to multifamily. No, I think the likelihood of an institution coming in and buying this property and keeping it an institution is very low.
That's probably true.
Okay, so for me, that's helpful to know, because then I can weigh whether I think if we're going to sign up for having like a blighted property, or underutilized property, or waiting for like the perfect buyer to come along, that also comes with problems, nuisance issues. So I would want to know, in this decision that we have to make, that's the alternative. What First Step House is offering us is a model that you've proven works well, that you've been good neighbors, and that you want to seek to replicate that here. So just that second part wasn't really a question. That was me just walking through like what I'm going to be thinking about in terms of this vote, and what I'm going to be weighing in terms of what the alternatives are. So I appreciate you coming. I appreciate you talking about all the specifics of your program, and that you're willing to have that conversation about a development agreement to further shore up some of the concerns that my colleagues raised. Councilmember Lopez Chavez.
Oh yeah, if there's no other comment, I'd like to make a motion of the straw poll.
Okay, great.
And thank you, Sean, again. Thank you so much for presenting. Okay, we good?
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a straw poll to ask staff to work with planning to create a development agreement that is inclusive of the suggestions from SLCPD, as well as possible other suggestions we might hear in this public comment period.
Okay. So we've heard the straw poll. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I do.
And that would include the one line that I had also on the development agreement.
What is it?
Which was at 30% AMI. That their building would be at 30% AMI.
I think that's
separate.
I think that would affect what you just reiterated.
Right. Like generally we don't hash out the terms right here. No. I think normally we would say we would ask for some affordability component and say, let's talk about that.
Yes. So add
as opposed to saying, yeah.
So add affordability component.
Okay. Let's do them both. Let's do them separate.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
When it comes to the affordability requirement, the community benefit requirement associated with zoning changes does require an applicant to propose some community benefit. In this case, it's that affordability level. The code requires us to enshrine that if it's something that the council accepts into a development agreement. So we're already going to be doing that if that's the direction the council directs us to go. That development agreement would run with the land for the term that it applies. So I wanted to put that out there because I think it's already somewhat inherent in our code. It doesn't necessarily require specific action. Mm-hmm. What we do want from the council is to decide whether to accept that community benefit, waive it, or modify it in some way.
Right. Okay.
Can I?
Hold on. I think Sean, the applicant, wanted to answer.
I just wanted to add that when we apply for low-income housing tax credits for this project, Utah Housing Corporation, which is the entity that allocates the tax credits, will require the 30% as well.
Got it. Okay. Councilmember Mono.
Sorry. Okay, the first one is that the first straw poll is to ask staff to work with planning and the applicant to create the terms of a development agreement that can be considered that would relate to security and safety. Okay, I've looked in these things and I'm not seeing in the transmittal where that
I can
is,
give you
but-
the page. It's page 12.
Okay, great.
Sorry, if you're in your meeting materials, it's there on page 12.
I must be in a different document than you. That's all right. I'm happy with that. The second thing that Nick Norris just said is that we have a community benefit. We just created that last year, or whatever, and so that would require some form of community benefit to be offered with the request for the rezone. In this case, they've already selected affordable housing. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's right.
Okay, and then we as a council have to, if we approve the rezone, we have to accept that community benefit as well?
You don't have to accept that.
Okay.
So the council has full discretion on that community benefit.
I see.
You can accept it, you can propose a different community benefit. You can decide that no community benefit is required because sometimes there are some land uses that inherently have a community benefit.
But in this case, the applicant has already
They're proposing,
affordable housing.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay, we've
Wonderful.
spent quite a bit of time on this. We do have a motion or a straw poll. I'm going to let Councilmember Lopez Chavez say the last thing. Go ahead.
Nick, can you clarify that the affordable housing incentive, if it's sold, could, because it's not in a deed agreement, that a future buyer or purchaser could make it market rate?
No. So the community benefit, the way it's intended is that it essentially, it's a development agreement that passes from owner to owner for a period of time. After, say, 30 years or 40 years, whatever it is, then it could be.
Okay, so I am going to ask for, you've all heard the straw poll from Councilmember Lopez Chavez. Great, that's thumbs up all around. Councilmember Dugan, do you still want to make that?
No, because I think Sean and Nick answered my question about the affordability, so I did not make the straw poll.
Great, cool. Let's move on to.
Thank you.
Chair, I just have one quick
sorry.
comment.
Yes.
So thank you. I wanted you to get your outcome before addressing this. So I think to Councilmember Lopez Chavez earlier concern related to it all being concentrated in a single area, I just want the opportunity to say on the record, I agree. That is a concern that we collectively should discuss as a city, because it's not just a question about undue burden in certain areas, but it's also a question of access. And so there are individuals in my district who do not have access to these types of solutions. And so I want to make sure that you know that you have at least my support in terms of, as we advance these policy conversations about how we as a city are strategic about both zoning as well as incentivizing additional solutions, that I am more than here for it, and I appreciate you raising it.
Great, yeah, me too. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's move on.
Could I make one comment or make you aware of one issue? Assuming everything went smoothly, we would intend to submit application to Utah Housing Corporation at the end of April.
Okay.
If we don't have the proper zoning in place, we're not able to submit application. I just wanted to make the council aware of that.
Okay, I will get you on the agenda if you. What?
Yeah, I don't think we've set the date yet for the public hearing. I think it's tentatively planned for them.
Yeah, if you can start having those discussions as soon as possible, I will get you on the agenda. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to. Make sure I do the thing I just said I would do. Okay, it is an alley vacation at 1409 South Edison Street.
This is a proposal to vacate a section of city-owned alley adjacent to the property you mentioned, and also the other side of the alley, which is 1404 South 200 East, and this is in Council District 5. If approved by the council, the alley property would be divided and given to the property owners. The applicant is joining us remotely and would appreciate an opportunity to address the council, and I'll turn it over to Diana. I believe so.
Good evening.
Evening.
Just to reiterate what, can I have the next slide, please? What Brian has said, that this is an alley vacation of a portion of an alleyway that's located to the east of the applicant's property at 1409 South Edison Street. The portion to be vacated is approximately 11 feet by 52 feet. So we're looking at about 572 square feet. This would be shared between the applicant and the neighbor to the east. The recommendation on this, the planning staff did take this to the Planning Commission with a recommendation for approval. The Planning Commission did vote to bring an unfavorable recommendation to you. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to go over this aerial. This aerial is actually shifted, so north is to your left, State Street is at the bottom of the screen. This aerial actually shows two alleys. So the first one is the one in question, which is from Cleveland Avenue, which is on the right side of the screen. And that dead ends into the state property, the Utah state property, which is highlighted in red. That is frontaged onto State Street. The second alley, which is not in question, is from 13 South on the left, which dead ends at that state property, but is actually blocked off before the state property. It's actually blocked off at the Utah Power and Light Power Facility. That's noted with the red X on the purple line on the left. Next slide, please. So these are pictures of the existing alley that's in question. The first one is taken from Cleveland Avenue, and that's looking north. The second one is kind of midway on the alley, looking north again. It is not hard surfaced the entire way, but it is maintained and is drivable. There are a few houses along this portion of the alleyway that use this alley. Next slide, please. And then these last two photos are of the end of that alleyway. The left one is showing the gate that has been there for several years, blocking that use of the end of the alleyway. And the one on the right is just a little bit closer, showing how the applicant has utilized that property within his property. The applicant should be here virtually if you have any questions.
Okay.
He doesn't have a presentation.
So if the applicant is still here, you have 5 minutes, and we have to be kind of strict on the time. So when it gets to 5 minutes, I'm going to stop you, okay?
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I appreciate your time and wanted to thank Diana and all of her staff for just the support and helping us through this process. Yeah, so as she mentioned, she really gave a pretty good briefing on it. We bought the house in May of 2011, my wife and I, and the gate was already there. So yeah, there was a previous statement that said we had put the gate in, but that gate was already there. You know, ourselves and the neighbors have been maintaining the alleyway for the whole time. And that, yeah, if you look at the Google Earth photos from 2007, you can clearly see that the gate was there before we purchased the property. The neighbors all are in support of this as well, which is really nice. They've been helpful and supportive. And then, yeah, you know, as far as the state property to the north is concerned, you know, last year they did make us cut down trees. So it is a state property and they have no intention of going anywhere there. My wife would like to hop in and say a few words too. She's much more eloquent. This is my wife, Brianna Benabos.
Hi, thank you. We own the property together, and I just kind of wanted to say a couple things as well. So, we purchased the home in 2007, but when we were going back through, or 2011, but when we were going back through Google Earth images, you can kind of see that all the way as far as back as 2007, you will see that that gate from the street view shows that it's used. And our neighbor, that Diana mentioned that we would be sharing the property with, if we were able to vacate it. She's lived there for almost 30 years. I mean, the age of her fence kind of confirms that as well. So, her 18-inch overreach kind of compared with ours is, I mean, it's just been there for a very long time. Not that that's, a reason, but just on our end, we'd like to make it clear that we did not put this fence in to block access off. And as noted in your packets that you guys probably already received, only the city engineering department, when the Diana's staff did their review, were opposed to our application. So likely that probably helped the planning commission subsequently reject our application. But however, I really wanted to illustrate that it's worth noting that the fire and the police departments, emergency services, did not have any objections because, as they say, the right of way is not adequate for large emergency vehicles to traverse, which, in a lot of cases, we've both worked in the wildland fire service large vehicle industry before. And, those utility vehicles are often the same size as emergency vehicles. And since we purchased our home, I think what was also noted in the engineer's findings was that, maybe the public utilities might have an interest in accessing the process. But since we've owned it, and even going through any of the subsequent power outages, I think, back when the big windstorm hit the lake or hit Salt Lake, and a lot of power, including our own, was taken off of our house, we have never received any requests from Rocky Mountain Power or any other public utilities to access, that alley, or I guess kind of through our property, for any maintenance needs or any concerns that we might be blocking their access to any of those utility poles. And we've also never been contacted by Salt Lake City Engineering, about any of these issues as well in the entire time that we've lived here, to be able to maintain access for that. And so, over the years, as we've observed, especially when any major power issues have come up, that it's been our experience that all the electrical utility access has been gained on the state-owned property. So to the north of us, they've been able to put bucket trucks in to access the utility pole that is at the northeast corner of our property and kind of shared with all the neighbors. And that area that we've observed, even when we've had our trees trimmed, also that state parking lot seems to provide a lot better access for large vehicles, as it is a hard surface. And as I mentioned, over the years, we've never been contacted by any city agencies with any issues until earlier this year, when a home flipper down the street was concerned that our gate was blocking access for any potential buyers to be able to access the alley just through, without having to back out and turn around. However, as Diana noted earlier, the state of Utah owns that property next to us, and what the photos don't show extremely well, I think maybe one of the second ones did, is that is a brick concrete wall to the north of our property, that completely blocks the access. So
Okay,
even if our
thank
gate
you.
was
That's
on-
time.
Oh, okay.
Thank
cool.
you, though.
Yep.
Yeah, so council members, any questions on this item?
I think people would be disappointed if I didn't comment on an alley. It's kind of a joke that
I would.
I'm obsessed with alleyways. And I've stated, hi Bree, good to see you. Bree used to serve on the peanut board, so I have, and I appreciate your service, but I have stated in the past that I don't like closing alleyways. Specifically when I think that especially when I think that they could have some future potential use as a passageway or as access to an ADU or things like that. And I am looking at this. I'm familiar with the area. I do realize that there's a brick wall there, But this is one case where the alleyway is completely intact up to the state's property, which is right now a parking lot, and then intact again all the way to the street to the north. So it is to me a little bit more difficult to, based on things that I've said in the past and other positions I've taken on alleyways, for me to look at this one and say, yeah, that this one has no potential future use ever for the city. So I haven't made a final decision, but it is difficult for me to look at this one and say I can't see any reason why we would ever need that in the future. I realize also city doesn't maintain alleyways very well, and we haven't done a good job of a lot of those things. So I'm sympathetic to those things, but I think for me, I need a little more time to think through this before I can be supportive of it.
Councilmember Young, yes.
I think this one's for our staff, real quick. Can you go to the last slide in your presentation? Is that possible?
Cannot, but if we could get some help
Anyone?
with that.
Okay. My core question, I think, is specific to the yellow lines that are drawn on that aerial view. Okay, so
those are parcel lines. The yellow
got
lines.
it. Okay, so but we're looking. Okay, so on mine they're yellow. It's fine. Edison Street. So we're saying there's still Edison Street access to the state property, correct?
Correct, from Cleveland Avenue. From 13th, it actually dead ends into a cindered block wall as well. So see where the X is on that black line on Edison from the north?
Yes.
That dead ends.
So, and I guess the reason I highlight this for everyone is I think, Councilmember Mono, to your earlier point, that alley is not the sole point of access. Like, because they have Edison Street as well, I think that there are other options that make that a little bit different. I, too, am not in a space where it's like, yes or no at this point. Like, I think it's important to hear more. But I did just want to point that out, that to me is different than if it was only the alleyway that was going to create some of those access points. So, thank you.
So, thank you. Can I actually go back to Councilman Mono? So I just want to, I know you're going to know this, but so when I was talking about the two alleyways, the one that comes off of Cleveland, that one was created, that alley was created with the subdivision, which is an entirely different subdivision than the one from the north was platted with. The state property was not platted with an alleyway. There was nothing that was vacated or there was no alley created. So if the state property did redevelop, they would have to dedicate that right of way to the city.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different process.
I appreciate that, and I understand. And I think that for maybe for the applicant's benefit and just for my colleagues, I realize that it dead ends into property that neither the applicant nor the city control. I do want to just point out that in other places within our city, we've master planned things like mid-block walkways where we're asking redevelopment projects to allow for passageways in the mid-block. And we routinely do that, and we routinely prioritize things like that. I realize if the state property never redevelops, there's no chance of that. I look at that property and think, it probably in my lifetime will be redeveloped. I don't imagine that it stays exactly like it is in my lifetime. And if there is a future strategy that I think we have taken steps to do alleyway activation and redevelopment projects throughout the city as a pilot project. I could see that large parcel being redeveloped and that actually being the impetus to say, why don't we reuse these two abutting alleyways in a very creative and unique way? And I think of like over in the west, over in your district where that bakery and the spa are, that's another example where a private development had a large enough parcel that when they redeveloped, we said, let's support this and look at activating that alleyway. And I think that's a really good example of something that has done that. So I wouldn't, and again, I'm not saying I'm a hard no on this, but I I see this as something where in my lifetime I could see that alleyway becoming useful.
Any other comments on this? I just had a question about the planning commission was saying that they could see like a future use for this if the state disposed of the property or something. Is that like based on anything in particular?
Not at all.
Is there, okay.
And I mean, it's not only the state property, the power facility is right there, which causes problems now because you cannot even cross in front of that, in that active alleyway because of the security risk to that. So it is those two properties.
Okay. Yes, it is challenging my general rule too on alleys, but luckily we don't have to make a decision right now. So any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you to the applicant. Okay, we're gonna, no, we are not. Absolutely not. You used all of your extra time talking about First Step House. So now we're going to number 5. Funding allocations for the 1-year action plan for community development, block grants, and other federal grants.
We have more time for it next week.
Yeah, and we are, thank you. As Jen was just telling me, this is going to be a quick version because we have a lot of time dedicated to this, a lot of time dedicated at the next meeting. It's going to be painstaking. We'll wait for you. No, we won't. Okay. All right. Give us just the headlines.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Or do you want to go to the really important headlines first?
Oh, no. Give us some warm-ups and then the big ones.
I will go as quickly as I can through a couple introductory things. So as you mentioned, this is FY26 funding allocations and the 1-year action plan for HUD grants, including CDBG grants and others. There's over $7.7 million in HUD grants that are expected to flow this year from HUD through the Division of Housing Stability and be dispersed to organizations and programs selected by the council in these several briefings. There's also a 5-year consolidated plan that the council will need to vote on. This sets the direction for the next 5 years, the next 5 annual plans. And you can see the highlights of that 5-year consolidated plan in attachment C2. The plan also proposes slight modifications to the geographical area defined for targeted CDBG spending on public infrastructure and economic development. And that is, you can see that map in attachment C3. The Housing Stability Division is also proposing a minimum funding threshold change. So traditionally, that minimum has been $30,000 annually for any organization, and it would switch to $50,000 annually. So that's something else to keep in mind for your discussions. This would be included in the new 5-year consolidated plan and in the future annual action plans. But for FY26, that's this year, the funding floor would remain at $30,000. And finally, as usual, there are funding contingencies because the HUD funding amounts are based on estimates. Then these are confirmed later, and Housing Stability requests these funding contingencies, thank you, to be adopted in case there's significant variation between the amounts that were estimated and the amounts that come through. So just a brief mention of the timeline. This is your second briefing, and as Jennifer mentioned, there's a potential for it to be continued on March 25th. The third briefing would be either on April 1st or April 8th, if a third briefing is needed, and the potential adoption vote would be on April 15th, 2025. So if you'd like, we can go to the attachment C1, which is the recommended uses of FY26 federal funding, and Tony and his team are available for questions on specific projects if you have them.
And typically this first briefing would be going through projects, council members identify questions, our staff follows up with the administrative staff to figure out those questions. But if you don't want to spend the time and go through the full log, given the hour, I think you could just send questions to Allison and she can work with the administration in advance of the next meeting, but it's totally up to you guys.
I have a few questions I'd like to ask. I don't need answers tonight. On item number 2,
I'm sorry, could you move the mic a little closer? Thanks.
on item number 2, the money going to Assist Incorporated, the money that we give them, is that guaranteed to stay in Salt Lake City and serve our Salt Lake City residents?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I had the same question about Habitat for Humanity. I have a question about this item number 7, the NIS team. We are keeping $845,381 in-house. NeighborWorks Salt Lake asked for $400,000 for things that seem to align pretty closely with what we're doing. Is there a reason we're not outsourcing to a known partner to help us, especially since their track record for task completion is pretty stellar? You don't have to answer today if you'd want to prefer to do it in written form. And then my final concern that I want to raise tonight is that we are funding nothing to the YWCA. Not only are they our hometown domestic violence shelter, they also serve the people who score highest on the lethality assessment index. They are their security and access controlled in ways that other domestic violence shelters aren't. I'm afraid that our failure to invest in them is a failure to invest in those most in need. My gut reaction is to take the money in this category from South Valley Services, since they're getting $178,000 out of another pot already for another application, and give it to the YWCA. I could be open to negotiation instead of not giving it to South Valley, spreading peanut butter another way. But those are my concerns.
Could you, Victoria, South Valley, which number is that?
South Valley is, okay, YWCA is 32, and South Valley is 24. I could, like I said, I could be convinced that we trim other places, you know, but my instinct is that South Valley is getting pretty significant support for at least one application from another pot. I really, really, really can't abide us not investing in the YWCA. They take a full third of the state's domestic violence cases. We have to stand behind them.
Oh, God. I'm not going to start over. If you'd like to answer any of those questions, you can. But what would you rather?
Sure, we can kind of just go backwards from, so yeah, that's definitely doable to move the YWCA, the South Valley's award to the YWCA, both domestic violence service providers. So that's something. You had a question too about why NeighborWorks Salt Lake wasn't funded. That kind of just fell down to the board's decision to really kind of go off of the highest scores and then go down and kind of, they were factoring in the minimum funding amount that the agencies could take. And then they just kind of went down, and you can see that NeighborWorks was just right there at the threshold for being awarded.
Well, I love people's donated time and intention. I work in the nonprofit sector and have written enough grants to know that I don't love scoring. It's inherently flawed. People are wonderful. The system's inherently flawed.
Councilmember, oh, sorry, did you want to respond to other things? There were a couple, no? Okay. Councilmember Young, go ahead.
Two things for me. I would also like to provide support to the request related to YWCA in terms of figuring out funding. I was wondering if it was possible to get either like a digital copy of this that is not a PDF, Or my other option would be to get a list of by organization what they're being recommended for. So could we see, so first step is being recommended for these items from these funding streams, just so that I could have a little more, like I'm trying to figure it out in my head, and I feel like I could do it faster if I had a digital version.
And we can take care of that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just in addition to what
Sorry, Councilmember Mono, go ahead.
Thanks. What, in addition to what Councilmember Young added, if it's at the tip of our fingertips, I would love added into that things non-CDBG dollars that go to these organizations as well. Because I know that in very rare cases we are funding nonprofits from different pools of money. So I'd love to know if any of those overlap.
And there is, I believe it's attachment 4 on the staff report, has a list of multiple funding to a single organization.
Thank you. Councilmember Dugan.
I'm a numbers guy, so numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'm just looking for how many apartments or how many homes are being repaired. And I understand the write-up, but I'd like to understand whether it's apartments or homes repaired, or how many homes and those numbers on 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Sure, we can follow up with that information.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, my only question was just was similar to two that Councilmember Petro raised. One about the South Valley shelter. I remember this came up once before, and it may have been actually before. Were you here? Okay, yes. And then I remember that there was some thing that we weren't considering. I just want to know what that is again. And then same question for NeighborWorks as Councilmember Petro. So. Okay. Anything else? Great. All right. That brings us to item number 6, which is a written briefing for budget amendment number 4, and we are now at standing items. I do not have any announcements. I don't think Ollie does, and we have some announcements though from.
I don't have specific announcements. I just wanted to
we
speak
don't.
quickly to Budget Amendment 4.
Oh, yes.
The reason it's a written briefing and not a full briefing is because it's a relatively straightforward. It's to accommodate a lead paint mitigation grant. But if you have any questions, send them our way and we can work with the administration to answer them.
Okay.
So, Budget Amendment number 4.
Okay, then that is all we have for tonight. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in for those online, and thanks for being here, all of you.